That is a fabulous portrait. I do cartoons for a living, and that is a fantastic drawing. It's so realistic. You've caught a quality of warmth that June has, and intelligence. A little hint of sarcasm at the corner of the mouth. Yeah. But if I have one criticism, I can see some of the numbers painting through. Yeah, you've got to use slightly thicker paint when you steal from someone else. Yeah. No, it's a fabulous portrait, and you actually have caught the inner and outer June, both beautiful. Everyone speaks in Maori this stuff, so I could say kia taua kia ngā kao nui. That's my old high school motto. It's the only Maori I know. But when Te Reo started becoming popular and you'd ring up a government department in Wellington, you'd ask for something to go, they'd go, kia ora, and I'd go, kia taua kia ngā kao nui. And they'd go, oh, I don't know anymore. But it is a great motto. It means have courage, be brave. And that's, I think there might have been, Ed would have had it tattooed on his heart, as did Charlie Upton, whose biography Mark has just referred to. I think it is entirely fitting that Rebecca's commissioned portrait of Lady Hillary is destined one day to hang in the Auckland Museum, hopefully near or alongside the iconic 1955 painting of Ed done by Edward J. Halliday, just 2 years after the first ascent of Everest. It is depicted against the towering backdrop of Mount Aoraki in New Zealand's Southern Alps. He's wearing a red tartan woolen shirt under a waterproof oilskin jacket and heavy strides. He's clutching an ice axe and goggles with rope coiled over his left shoulder. He's lantern-jawed and quietly amused, resolute, and he looks like a hero from Central Casting. It used to hang just inside the main entrance on the landing of the right-hand steps going up. You remember that seeing the portrait? Yeah. My partner Avril often used to take her son William to the museum, and one morning they paused on the landing beneath the painting, and Avril told Will, "This is Sir Edmund Hillary. He's a friend of Tom's, he's a friend of mine. He was the first person to climb Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world." Will's eyes popped wide. Wow, he must be a friend of Batman's. When Avril told this, Ed was delighted and absolutely thrilled with his new honour, rating it amongst some of the finest he'd ever received. Ed and Avril were good friends. Whenever we visited near the end of Ed's days, when Ed was frail and sometimes miserable, Avril always brought a bottle of Veuve Clicquot and, regardless of the hour, popped the cork. And over Ed's protestations, he was thrust a full glass of champagne, which then Avril told him very sternly that he should take a drink. Possibly mistaking Avril for June, he always did as he was told, and announced within a few seconds, "Gosh, you know what, Avril, I really do feel very much better now, thank you." Ed had a special nickname for Avril. He called her Mini Young. It was a label given to her by a monk in the remote Solukombu village of Loading while on a trekking trip with Mary and George Lowe and Ed and June. To celebrate Ed's 76th birthday, our small party, which included George and Mary, assembled in the community hall where Ed was presented with a birthday cake. It arrived from an oven, still steaming on a shovel. They carried it in on a shovel. Shaped like Mount Everest, it looked like a fresh pile of giant yak poo, and sadly tasted a bit like it as well. June, being the Alison Holst of the Solukombu, spotted the shortcoming, said, "Not enough baking soda." It just didn't blunt the merriment, and the Rinpoche, who was sitting beside Ed, leant over to Ed and pointed across to Avril and asked who she was. Avril said, "That was Avril, my Winnie, and she was Tom's partner." The Rinpoche nodded and said wisely, "Ah, Mini Young." Then he asked who the man sitting beside Avril was. Ed explained that was me. The Rinpoche nodded his head wisely and started to cackle. "Ah, Big Fat." So Ed started giggling as well, the bastard. So for years afterwards, Ed gleefully greeted us as Big Fat and Mini Young. And when I told John Clark this story, the New Zealand comedian, he forever writes me now, not now, he's dead obviously, but before then, he always addressed me as Big Fat. I don't know why, look at me, it's most unfair. And Avril was Mini Young. When I made the documentary View from the Top for TVNZ and later reconfigured it for Channel 4 UK, Mini Young did the picture research, spending long hours over the course of a fortnight at the Hillary home in Remuera, going through boxes and boxes of photographs and suitcases of scrapbooks of photograph albums and postcards and newspaper clippings. Ed actually set up a desk for Avril eventually in the laundry, the downstairs laundry, and where with his blessing he gave her the love letters to Louise and Louise's love letters to Ed. So Avril wrote these copiously. They were affectionate and gentle and they're not, lovely, beautiful, from a different era really. On one wall of the laundry was a cupboard marked Louise's papers. It was padlocked but seemed protected by it wasn't padlocked, but it seemed protected by a force field of some sort. Ed wandered in one morning and said nonchalantly, "I suppose you should look at these." He reached into the cupboard and retrieved a plastic bag full of oil and aviation fuel stained photographs taken from the crash site in Kathmandu Valley where Ed's first wife and daughter Belinda were killed when their fixed-wing aircraft stalled and dropped out of the sky. Avril remembered vividly the PowerShell sheen that oil and aviation fuel had lended to the singed photographs. Avril also remembers how calm and clear-eyed Ed was picking through the horrific images, telling her, "I haven't looked at these for quite some time." This was not the Ed Hillary that Mike Gill wrote about in his recent comprehensive biography, quoting from a letter that Ed wrote to Max Pearl saying, "I don't know if I can find the will to go on living. Maybe in a few months I will find the will to go on living. I can see little virtue in living, but who knows, I still may find some purpose in living." That purpose for living was upstairs, making Ed's morning tea and cutting up fruitcake. It was June. The reason Ed could face his terrible letters so calm and clear-eyed 20 years after the event in the laundry was down to many things: the slow passage of time itself, the love and care of his surviving children and family, Peter and Sarah and Rex Hillary, his brother, his family and brother-in-law, his in-laws, Phil and Jim Rose and Phil, and his close friends, but one close friend in particular, and especially, more important than all the others, June Mulgrew, Lady Hillary. When Ed was low down, which was often, and just wanted to do nothing but curl up under a duvet on bright sunny days, June would ring him up and invite him on a long walk to a beach or through a bush. Ed was always reluctant and stubborn at first, and not at all keen, but June wouldn't take no for an answer. She's a bit like Clive in that regard. And she would say, "Ed, I'm coming round, put on a warm jacket and shoes, I'll be there in 10. And she always was, and she came round and picked up Ed, and slowly but surely Ed came out of the deep depression, discovering for himself that life was worth living again. And the Sherpas of the Solakumbu were delighted to see the change in Ed that June brought about, and stamped their companionship and romance with a seal of approval that no one else could match. When they arrived in some of the Sherpa huts for the night, their Sherpa friends had placed out sleeping quarters for them as if Ed and June were a married couple. And you can't say higher than that. And eventually, of course, they did become the constant companion, and Ed's wife became husband and wife. Ed was not a modern husband, however. He tended the odd barbecue, but otherwise June did all the cooking and cleaning, keeping Ed supplied with delicious fruitcake and clean underpants, introducing him to funky rod and gun clothing in his latter years, all the while remaining immaculately groomed. Look at that beautiful purple coat. I think I can say without question that June is the best dressed person here after Mark.
Call it equal, Tom.
Yeah, we'll call it a draw. Yeah. June defied gravity in other ways as well. I have seen photographic evidence. She was strikingly more beautiful in her 40s than in her 20s, and few people have that good luck. And she's still a great beauty now. I first met her at the Sandcastle Motel at Peka Peka Beach, just north of Wellington, in January of 1991. It's not as sordid as it sounds. Ed and June had just returning north of Auckland after a holiday through the South road trip through the South Island, and Ed wanted me to meet June because we'd met in Melbourne a few months earlier, where Ed and I were both guest speakers at a sesquicentenary dinner in Canberra. Ed was the main event and I was the entree. I was the light relief. And I remember in my speech I said I flew across the Tasman at 35,000 feet, the same height as Everest almost. It was minus 60 degrees outside the plane again, not much colder than Everest. And Ed asked for a blanket, went outside and sat on a wing for the whole trip. And at Melbourne, we circled around the airport and nipped up and said, Edmund, come in, people, we have to land. And the audience liked this, but Ed was chuckling as well, and it was quite a good speech, actually, if I say so myself. And when I sat down, Ed's eyes were quite flinty and bright, and he said, that was quite good. I'll have to lift my game. And the old competitive bastard did. He got up and gave an absolutely stunning speech. And I remember looking around the room in Canberra, and all these Australians looking up, misty-eyed, and I thought, gosh, our hero was also their hero. They admired Ed as much as I did. And afterwards he went to the bar and drank lots of Jamisons, which I think I introduced Ed to Jamisons. He never drunk it before, he loved it. And at Sydney Airport we had lunch together, and I said to Ed, why hasn't anyone made a film about your life? You saw people have asked, but they haven't been the right person. I think Robert Redford and Clint Eastwood were keen at one stage. And I said, oh, I'd like to do it. He said, oh, you're the right person. Nearly 30 years later, there's actually no evidence that this has happened. But I have made 3 documentaries and a drama series, and Ed became one of my best friends. And as Mark said, when I went at the Pika Pika Motel, the idea was that I should meet June and see if I passed muster. I was auditioning really for the role of being fit enough to tell the Ed Hillary story, and we got on really well. June opened some of those plastic containers, and out came the lovely moist fruit cake, which was stunning. And June said to Ed, I think Tom should come with us to Nepal next year and get a feel for the place. And Ed said, that's a good idea. So off I went to Nepal. It was absolutely stunning. A couple of years later, it was Mark came along for the trip as well. Oh, it was their trip actually.
Yeah.
And I said to Mark said, how can I justify to TVNZ to go to Nepal? And I said, tell them he's very old and he could die at any minute, and this might be the last chance to get him on, to capture him in Nepal. So Mark came along, little knowing that in fact that Ed would get altitude sickness at Kundi, which is 15.5 or 16,000 feet. And there was a very dramatic series of days up there where Mark was remarkably good and ran around fetching oxygen, and he was one of the heroes of the night. And I remember how calm and strong June was. And the Sherpas all turned to pieces. They all started crying. They all thought the Barasat was going to die. I remember Mark asking Mingma, he said, how the Sherpas going to cope when Ed's gone? And Mingma started to cry. And they don't cry, the Sherpas. They're women give birth to children, and terrible situations. And they're just without self-pity. But Mingma started to cry, and the teardrop cleaned the skin on his face. It just went down his cheek, cleaning the skin as it trickled down. And Mingma said, Varasab, he's very old getting, very sick getting. And he said he paid him the highest compliment you can pay anyone. The Varasab, he is our mother and our father. And I think June can be said of June that you were Ed's mother and father too, near the end. June was an astonishing woman. We couldn't believe her energy. She strode up, there's a hill called an Amshi Hill, which is a killer. Even top mountaineers get buggered on it, and June just zoomed up it like she was on electricity, and she strode through everything so strongly. And we got to the Amshi Bazaar. None of us had had a bowel movement for 48 hours, and we were all feeling a bit nervous about Sherpa toilets. And June said, there's one out there, and there was this toilet that was cantilevered over a ravine with dried leaves for toilet paper. And June said, oh, don't be you pack of sissies, and she strode off. We were all sitting inside watching this Sherpa toilet rock and shake. I don't know what was going on. There was a flurry of leaves hurtling down into the and June came striding back, and we thought, well, if June can do it, we can do it. But none of us did, I think. Mark held on until he got back to New Zealand, which explains why he talked nonsense on the home show. And June was a force of nature, an absolute force of nature. I think it's no exaggeration to say that if you hadn't re-entered Ed's life the way you did, I don't think we would have got him for the next 30 years. I think you kept Ed alive for the rest of us. So the nation owes you a debt of thanks, June, for that. And Mark and I and lots of other people owe you for the debt of friendship. You're a remarkable lady, and I'm delighted that this fantastic picture has been done, and a worthy addition to the Taonga. It's fantastic. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Yes. Sort of, yeah. Yeah, so congratulations, June, and congratulations to the artists. Thanks very much, everybody.